Today on Context, tackling the need for a national suicide prevention strategy. We'll examine the complex issue and we'll focus in on youth suicide. I'm Lorna Duick. You're watching Context, the show that looks at life beyond the headlines. It claims a life somewhere in the world every 40 seconds, but it's an issue that society rarely talks about. Suicide. Among Canada's youth, it's the second leading cause of death and is particularly high among Aboriginal youth. Research has found there's a strong correlation between suicide and mental illness. Today, we want to discuss what causes young people to think about ending their life and how can society battle youth suicide. Let's put it in context. Well, in order to understand the complex issue of suicide, we need to examine the underlying causes, and here to help us do that is Dr. Lara Probst. She's a child and adolescent psychiatrist at North York General Hospital in Toronto. Dr. Probst, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Youth, why are they particularly vulnerable to this tragedy?
I think youth in general is a time of great change. And there's a lot of figuring out about oneself. How do I fit in? What is my place within society? What's my place within my family and in the larger context? And I think youth don't have the life resources necessarily to draw upon to know that even if things seem bad right now, they can get better. Also, youth have, it's a time where you're focusing a lot on peers and the pressures that come with that. So there's a lot of bullying that comes oftentimes along with youth, and these are all really, really big stressors.
You are a clinician. You see hundreds of youth every year at the hospital on these needs. What are the warning signs that I've got a teenager, a young adult, who's close to crisis here?
Right. There's a number of things that you can look for. A change in behavior, particularly if you're noticing that your child or classmate is becoming more withdrawn, if they're not spending time with friends that they previously enjoyed or doing activities that they previously enjoyed doing. Conversely, if you see a change in behavior that is suddenly someone who is very withdrawn has become very outgoing and very happy all of a sudden, that can be a warning sign as well, because sometimes when people are in crisis and they're contemplating suicide and they actually make the decision to go through with it, they feel a relief, and you can see sort of a joyfulness, unfortunately, that comes with that as well. Other things to look for are an interest in drugs and alcohol where maybe there wasn't one before.
And when you notice this kind of behavior, what do you do? What is the answer?
It is imperative not to keep quiet if you are concerned about someone. When people come to my office, I always start out my assessments in the same way. I say to them, everything we talk about here is going to be confidential unless I have a serious concern about your safety or the safety of someone else. And in that case, I do not keep confidentiality. So I think that if a friend has come to you, if someone has come to you with a concern about suicide, you have to be open, non-judgmental, listen to them and encourage them to seek help. If not, then you have to assist them to get help.
We're going to go shortly to government and talking about the mental health realities that are involved in our suicide cautions. And, the statistics vary. Between 60 and 95% of cases have connections between mental health and suicide. Our fear is, I've got to be an expert to wade in on that because it's a mental health issue. What would you say to that concern?
I think it's everybody's issue. I think that when you're talking about a life, and especially the life of a young person, it really starts from the ground up. By the time they come to our clinic, for example, at North York General Hospital, they've often passed through a number of people, teachers, coaches, religious leaders, friends, people who lead clubs. I think the onus is on everybody.
And you have statistics that indicate this is much worse as far as what's lying underneath the surface than what we actually experience. If we lose 10 people a day to suicide, which is our current rate, For everyone who actually commits suicide, what does it look like for those who are thinking about it?
There are a number of people that think about it. There is an interesting study that was done with some high school students in BC where they polled 15,000 students from grade 7 to 12, and they said 34% of those knew somebody who had contemplated suicide.
All right. Okay, thank you very much for challenging us to watch for the warning signs, to get help, and that we are none of us passive observers about these concerns, Dr. Lara Probst. Thank you very much. But our next guest is a member of Parliament who has tabled legislation in the House of Commons that, if passed, will compel the federal government to develop a national strategy for suicide prevention. Harold Albrecht is the MP for Kitchener-Conestoga, and he joins us from Ottawa. MP Harold Albrecht, what motivated you to table this bill?
Well, Lorna, over the last number of years, I've become more aware of the issue of suicide since I originally tabled a motion, M388, which dealt with predators. And as a result of introducing that bill on suicide predators, a number of people began to approach me talking more about suicide. And that's really what increased my interest in trying to find ways that we could reduce this problem in Canada. There are far too many Canadian youth, especially, who are ending their lives through suicide. And if we can provide some coordination for the groups on the ground that are already doing excellent work, we have Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, we have local groups in Waterloo Region, I have the Waterloo Region Prevention Council, but these groups are consistently asking for some level of leadership, coordination, to help them find ways that they can share best practices.
So what difference can the government make with such a personal issue?
Well, I think here again we're talking about trying to provide hope for those who are facing the issue of suicide, but that they're struggling with suicidal thoughts. Hope for the families that may have been left to deal with the aftermath of suicide. And as I said earlier, hope for those groups that are already doing good work on the ground. The Canadian government, I think, has a role to play at the federal level in terms of coordination and leadership in this area.
And we have a clip of Prime Minister Stephen Harper in the House of Commons during question period last week addressing the National Strategy Initiative. Let's take a look at that.
Mr. Speaker, this is obviously a very important issue, and far too many Canadian households are affected by the anguish of a suicide. As many members will know, on this side of the House, we had a suicide of one of our former colleagues, so we understand well the pain that this causes. The government has taken important initiatives, the setting up of the Mental Health Commission and specific programs to help with suicide prevention in communities across the country, but obviously we'll look at any specific ideas to see how we can improve on this particular national health problem.
So what is your advice, Mr. Albrecht, to families, to Canadian families?
Well, primarily what we're looking at is, as I said earlier, sharing best practices, increasing the research, but more importantly, the research that's already been done across Canada and indeed internationally. There's good research there. We have to get that research out of the classroom, so to speak, and into the hands of those groups who are already working on the ground, providing the kind of local context for addressing this situation, because the federal government isn't interested in telling communities how to do suicide prevention initiatives. What we want to do is provide the resources and then have that local group contextualize the research and apply it in a way that will make a difference.
All right, Harold Albrecht, MP for Kitchener-Conestoga, thank you for the legislation initiative and for this interview today. We're tackling suicide, a heavy issue, and we want to turn to you at home and find out what you think. Should there be a national suicide prevention strategy? Send us your answers by Facebook, Twitter, email, or by phone. And we'll continue the conversation on youth suicide. We'll meet a man who almost took his own life and has since intervened on 360 other suicide attempts. Stopping suicide with Your Life Counts. That's next on Context.